the net effect of the Iran conflict for the United States has been to weaken it in the Western Pacific. And if Xi Jinping believes that that offers an opportunity for him, I think he would like to, accomplish his goals in Taiwan peacefully, preferably. But the United States has signaled to the whole region that it is not a reliable ally. And I think that just can't help but benefit China, including in a potential Taiwan scenario. I mean, it was at first Trump was just sort of disowning the NATO allies. And now he is also criticizing Japan, Korea, and Australia. So that's basically, that's pretty much the full plate of America's major allies around the world. I don't see how both Russia and China don't benefit from that.
Yes. What then are the chances for a diplomatic off-ramp to this conflict in the Middle East? And how much clout, diplomatic clout, does China have in this equation?
Well, I think if at the end of the day, a settlement is going to involve Iran, I mean, assuming that Trump hasn't, as he says, taken out Iran, whatever that could possibly mean. But if Iran is going to be part of the settlement, that means all the world's nations are going to be negotiating with Iran. But standing behind Iran will be China. I mean, the Iranians have clearly favored China. They've let Chinese ships through the Strait. They've talked about charging for use of the Strait in yuan. It just seems to me that China and Iran will be sort of together in whatever negotiation comes out following this conflict.
Following this conflict, that's the important element here. What happens afterwards, whether it's regime change or not? How does this change the political and diplomatic landscape in the Middle East? And getting back to China and its influence and its mercantilism, for want of a better expression, in the Middle East. You argue that Gulf states are not averse to dealing with Beijing and Moscow. But again, we saw how tensions escalated between China and the US over Panama. It's not guaranteed that this is China's involvement is going to bring stability.
No, I don't think stability is in our future anymore. I mean, the United States, to some extent, not always, but to some extent provided fundamental security stability in Europe and Asia as well as in the Middle East. I think the United States is now forfeiting that role, which means there's going to be a lot of flux and chaos and breakdown. The order that we have known for some 80 years is over. And I think that doesn't lead to a new order right away. It leads to disorder and chaos and conflict. And I think that's the danger right now, is that as the United States steps away from its historic role, we are going to enter a period of much greater conflict among many different types of nations.
And what then is the region going to look like if the rule of law, if the international rule of law doesn't apply, if there is something of a vacuum in terms of who the guarantors of peace and stability are going to be, if Russia and China do fill that vacuum, what sort of region in the Middle East are we looking at?
Well, I think we're looking at something like we looked at in previous centuries, where it was pretty much up for grabs. It was an area of great power competition and conflict. That's not unusual for the Middle East. We haven't seen it in recent decades, but I think that's what we're returning to. And I don't see any way that whenever this ends and however it ends, it seems to me that you're going to have more great power players in the region exercising influence at the expense of what had been a pretty predominant American influence.
Robert, let's try and address that vexed question on when it ends. Does President Trump have perhaps an overly optimistic time frame for how long this conflict and this war on Iran is going to last? Because we're certainly getting a lot of mixed messages from the administration.
In all honesty, I don't think Donald Trump has any clue what is going to happen and when it's going to happen. He's making this up as he goes along. It was an impulsive action to begin with. I think it was driven mostly by Israel saying that they had an opportunity to take out the Iranian leadership and that the United States should come in on it. And Trump jumped in without thinking about further consequences. Then, obviously, they didn't calculate, amazingly, they didn't calculate on the possibility that Iran would strike out at neighbors in response to the attempt to basically liquidate the regime. And so he's been making it up as he goes along, and he still is. So I don't think he has any idea whether this is a 2 or 3 week activity, or whether it's a month or 2 months or 3 months, or whether we'll be at this time next year. And so, I don't blame people for, having a difficult time trying to guess the next American step. I suppose we'll see something on Tuesday night U.S. time, but
yes.
I don't think Donald Trump has a clue what he's going to do next week, or even potentially 2 days from now.
Robert, and you're there in Washington. Do we have a clear understanding at all of what constitutes a victory over Iran from a U.S. policy perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see, look, there's no question that Iran has been damaged. There's no question that its offensive capabilities have been damaged. There's no question that its nuclear capabilities were already damaged. So, Iran has been, gravely weakened. On the other hand, it may come out of this conflict stronger. It may come out with the ability to exercise substantial control over the strait. It may come out with sanctions being lifted against it. And so at the end of the day, it's hard to know how America would define victory. And now Trump seems to be defining victory as part of a war crime, which is what he's threatening to unleash tomorrow. I think it's worth keeping that in mind. To go after Iran's civilian power grid is exactly what Vladimir Putin is doing in Ukraine, and which the United States has labeled a war crime. So I don't know what victory looks like at this point. He could have declared victory after knocking out the regime and claiming that he'd set back the nuclear weapons capacity, but he didn't do that, again, because he really doesn't have a good clue about what he's trying to accomplish, I think.
Robert, and at the end of the day, the transmission mechanism into financial markets and the global economy and to the cost of living and all of us, Joe Public, is through the oil price and the passage of oil and gas and commodities through the Strait of Hormuz. What do you think is the end game there when there is such a tussle for this strategic waterway and perhaps creeping nationalization by Iran? How do you think the energy consumers in this region, India and China, are managing what potentially could end up as quite a profound supply shock?
Well, I mean, obviously, some of the countries are in better shape in terms of their reserves than others. China has, I don't know how much days of reserves it have left. Japan has some reserves left, but in any case, they're already suffering, and South Korea is talking about rationing gas and other energy, and we haven't even begun to see the political effects of this. I don't know how they're going to manage economically, and I'm not an economist, and I don't know what the answer to higher energy prices is. But what I do know is that the politics in these countries, especially with those that are democracies, are going to turn very, very strongly against the United States. And again, as an American, I can only lament what has happened to America's reputation in the world. We're now a combination of scary and unreliable, which seems to me, again, to lead to likely international isolation.